I think the truth is many of us have a story of adventure within our lives, but because we don't define it as such,
Mm.
we kind of say like, oh, maybe my story is not worth telling.
Yeah.
But in reality, you never know.
I think we all have adventures. Yes, it's we all have experiences of discomfort, and in the end, when you go into these experiences that are new to you, so necessarily to some degree uncomfortable, that is an adventure. So your first day at school is an adventure. Learning a new language is an adventure. Embarking in a new relationship is an adventure.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that you're right. That's a good spirit or good attitude to have towards anything you do in life, right? Because after all, I mean, life is essentially an adventure because you're just discovering things along the way, and through that discovery you kind of see what you like, what you don't like, what you think is worth your time and stuff. So I think that's a good attitude. You're right. I never thought of it that way.
Well, and if it's not an adventure, it means that you're playing safe. So it means that you remain in this comfort zone where you know how things work and you are competent.
Yeah.
And then you miss the learning,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
Because whenever you grow, it means you must go out of the zone where you're confident and competent in.
Yeah. And it almost doesn't even matter how big or small the adventure is, right? It's just more like getting out of your comfort zone and growing.
Mm, yeah, yeah.
I'd be interested to, because you spoke a little bit about your background, and I've only really learned it from history books because it was part of our curriculum. But you grew up, during the tail end of the Cold War.
Mm.
What was that experience like, and what was it like to see the falling of the Berlin Wall? It must have been quite an occasion.
Yeah, it's so I was born in Hungary in the 80s, and and so Hungary referred, and many of these countries referred to themselves as socialist countries. They didn't say communist; they said socialist. And communism was rather light in Hungary. So it means that education had a very high level. There was guaranteed employment. Healthcare was for free. And in 1956, there was also a revolution in Hungary, after which some reforms were introduced. And that gave people a relative high standard of living and relative cultural freedom. So these were deviations from the really strong Marxist Leninist system. And actually, in Hungary and the Eastern Bloc, this was referred to as goulash communism. Goulash is a national dish in Hungary, and so goulash communism is a metaphor that as long as you did not confront the government, you could fill your belly and have a comfortable life.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like it wasn't bad at all. It sounds like it was a pretty well, I mean, I don't know if that's accurate of socialism in general, but it sounds like it was a pretty middle class, affordable lifestyle that you could have for yourself.
Well, some. It doesn't exclude that there were also other realities, and you also had other elements of communist systems, such as um, flexible morals, under the table deals, a system of privileges enjoyed by some who had more power and connections. And I think it was, again, if you confronted the system, so if you were an intellectual, a journalist, an artist, or even, like a university teacher, and then sharing your different ideas, that could become very uncomfortable and dangerous. So it was very common that people that was more the generation of my grandparents, taught their children, like, don't talk about things, don't openly share your ideas. It can become risky.
Yeah. Did you feel that way growing up? Or were you were you afraid of speaking your mind and going against the grain, so to speak?
I think I was a little bit in between. So somehow, to some extent, yes, because kids feel and learn a lot through implicit messages, through their families and through society in which they live in. And somehow I was, of course, also different because it was a different generation. And we moved quite early to West Berlin, then West Berlin. And that changed a lot of things. We went with the work of my father, so it was all regulated. It was not seeking asylum or escaping like some people have done it.
Yeah.
And you asked earlier about the falling of the Berlin Wall. So that was in late November '89. And by that time, I have lived for 3 years already with my family in West Berlin. And actually, I do remember that evening that people were just surprised and it was doubting, like, no, this cannot be true. There was disbelief, there was wonder, astonishment, a lot of confusion. People were heading into the streets to check with their own eyes if it's true, because the Iron Curtain, so what we refer to as the limit between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc, was considered impregnable. And now there were news that the Berlin Wall is falling and people are standing on the wall with their hammers and with their own hands opening the wall. And so this was really symbolic. I think it was maybe the biggest event or one of the biggest events of the 20th century. And what's remarkable that it has been achieved peacefully and in celebration. And not only did it unite a city and a country, it really ended the era that has shaped many countries in Europe and actually even across Europe or in other parts of the world, and 2 generations.
What?
So that was, I think I understood the meaning of this only much later, that it was really a moment of history. And I think I'm still really touched that Hungary, the country where I was born in, played a major role in the first step, in opening the borders, and that led that people from East Germany could go to Austria. And so one thing led to the other, and the Berlin Wall fell.
Yeah. It's funny you brought that up, because that was going to be my next question, which was like, were you able to appreciate the magnitude? But I guess, it was only years later did it
Yeah.
really sink in?
So at that moment, when 9th of November and the days afterwards in '89, number one, I was 9 years old. So you see and understand things in a different way.
Yeah.
And I was, I think, less touched personally or less impacted because I could go back to Hungary. So even the first years when we lived in West Berlin, school holidays, we always went back to Hungary. So I could see my family. My family was not separated. And I think that changes a lot. I think it was probably different for German kids in Germany who could not see parts of their family because they have been living at the other side of the wall.
Yeah. Wow. So post this experience, after this experience, you had quite a bit of travel. Maybe before I ask the following questions or the subsequent questions, it'll be good to kind of maybe summarize what was your journey to all the way to Singapore, and then we can kind of explore each moment.
Yeah, I went to live in a few countries. So I spent my childhood mainly in Berlin. I finished my school years in Berlin, West Berlin, and then unified Berlin. And after that, I went to France to study there. And right after my studies, I moved to China, and that's where I have started my professional life. And I spent 6 years in Shanghai, and then in 2011, I moved to Singapore. Um, and it just happened that we created a family here, and that was also the intention. So that's why we wanted to move to Singapore. So yes, before age 30, I have been living in 5 countries, 5 quite distinct cultures, and each time it was not moving for an employer or for these expat stints, but it was moving for longer periods of time, um, out of own decision, and then
Yeah.
really immersing myself in the culture, learning the language, getting to know the people, um, and so forth.
Yeah, and that's something I'm really curious about. Um, as when you move to Berlin and maybe even France, these were decisions taken together with your family, and then your decision
No,
to
not that.
not France. France
No,
was your decision.
just
Okay,
Berlin. Yeah,
so so Berlin, right? And then the subsequent decisions were made entirely on your own terms.
yeah.
Is there a difference in the way you felt when the decision was not yours versus the decision that was yours? I mean, is does the same feelings enter, or were there different feelings?
It's very different. So I think we all have some basic human needs, and autonomy, competence, and relatedness are among these fundamental needs. And when we moved to Berlin, even though I was just 6 years old, it was not my choice, and it was a huge cultural shock. I was suddenly living in a country where I did not speak the language. I did not understand the social norms, and how what are the accepted or behaviors. Um, I had only my immediate family, but not relatives and friends. And my social status has also changed. So in Hungary, I was among the majority. I was in the upper middle class and enjoying the privileges that go with that. And then moving to Germany, West Berlin at that time, I was suddenly a minority. And I had myself and my family very different, power, opportunities, and status as the local people.
Yeah, and if we reference China, because I would assume that when you moved there, it was kind of similar in the sense that it was probably a cultural shock. The language, I'm assuming you didn't know. Um, your network there probably wasn't strong. How did you feel about that move, and how did you kind of adapt to such a different environment?
Yeah, so moving to China was also a little bit like moving to a different planet. And no, I did not speak the language before. I have never been to China before. Um, and um, and actually, many things in my life were in a very early and hence also fragile state. So so I knew that moving there it will be difficult, and I think, well, I was still interested, and I think I need to give a little bit of context here that I did not move again for an employer or for my studies. It was I have met my today husband, then boyfriend, in Paris, who used to live in Shanghai before, and he wanted to go back, and asked me if I would want to go with him. And so we both knew that this would be sort of a fast track for the relationship to see if we are a good fit, because we have never lived together in Paris. We have only known each other in, dating for a few months. And so I knew that at least in the beginning, without a job, without my own circle of friends, without speaking the language, I will be quite vulnerable. And well, I guess we accepted the risk. So we accepted the risk, and well, 17 years forward, it turns out that he's my husband, and we have two wonderful and exuberant kids. So I guess it was a good decision. But so, how did I take the decision? I think in these big questions in life, we like to think you have to be fully analytical and rational, but you cannot be. Because you cannot think of all the possibilities and opportunities and risks that you will have with the decision that you're going to take. So I think you have to tap into something more holistic and be aligned between the head and the heart, because that's, even if things turn out in a different way than planned, you still know why you have made that choice.
Yeah.
And then it's much easier to accept it and live with it.
Yeah. And you mentioned making a decision with your head and heart. What did that look like for you when you moved to China? Talk us through that, how you came to that decision using both your head and your heart.
I think when you're aligned between the head and the heart, it's you feel more peaceful, and there is no guarantee of what's gonna come, but you know why you're ready to take that path. So that's what I refer to, and so in my case, moving to China, partly that was the curiosity about China, because China was coming as an economic power, and it's a huge country. They have an amazing culture, and in Western media, you tend to read very one-sided stories about China, especially 10 years or more than 10 years back. So I guess there was a certain curiosity to build my own view and experience China. But then, of course, it was giving this relationship a chance to maybe deepen, and that luckily worked out.
Yeah, the risk paid off for you. That's awesome. What? How is it like to adapt to new environments and cultures? What has your experience been like?
Well, it's both exciting and uncomfortable, because so when you live extended periods of time in outside of your own environment, it sort of pushes you to self-reflect, but also to self-confront and self-align. So really, what is important and what matters. And I think these experiences are really important, because you learn a lot about where you live, where you have moved, but also about yourself.
Yeah. How did you get comfortable during that process? Was it just a process of time that you eventually got comfortable, or did you have to do certain things intentionally to be comfortable in a new environment, or through those different changes?
So I think you have to be very deliberate, and the more you go for the experience, the faster and the easier it can get, and the deeper you go. Because you can also go to a new country and then just ignore everything and remain in your little bubble and meet only people who come from your country and speak your own language. And then it's a bit like surviving the expatriation or immigration or living in that country. So I have learned in each country the local language, to, well, except China, that was what I call a limited working proficiency, but all the other languages to a fluent level.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot, partly to communicate with people, to be empowered, that you are more free to move around. And in some countries, this is really important. It's not in every country that people will speak English. So that helps a lot. Meeting people, learning about the country, which you can do beforehand. And now, as technology is more available, it also makes it more easy. So even before you arrive in a country, you can read up on the history, the culture, the attitudes, those things. You can reach out through social media to people to have at least the first few contacts. And then step by step, you can integrate.
Yeah. I can relate to that, and it also took me a while because I spent about 6 or 7 months in Ecuador, and at first it was very easy to not integrate because the people or 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 the people who connected with me first were people who wanted to learn English. And so I never really had the opportunity to learn Spanish, right? Because every time I spoke, they wanted to improve their English rather than me wanting to improve the Spanish. And so over time I got comfortable, but I also wanted to explore a different side. And so when I ventured out to places where they only spoke Spanish, I think over time I learned to be comfortable in that awkwardness of that interaction. You
Mhm.
know, them speaking Spanish, me just using hand gestures, just trying to figure it out. And I, I think that's one thing that I've learned, that it's through this discomfort, through this awkwardness, you realize that it really isn't that bad.
Mm,
You can, the awkwardness and the discomfort will be there, but it doesn't change the interaction. It's still genuine. But because I went to meet the people rather than have them come to me,
mm,
my opportunities to experience new things increased. And I
yeah.
think that's kind of what I've learned through that process as well.
Yes. So I think, yeah, when you go outside and live in different countries, it's I think you connect more with people. You recognize that however different we might be or appear to be, uh, in the end, we're actually very similar. We experience life through the same feelings. We have, if we boil it down, the same human basic needs that we want. And so when you recognize this common humanity, I think it gives you compassion towards others, but of course also towards yourself. And I think we need a little bit more compassion in this world.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's interesting because and I'm sure you've experienced that, and I'm curious as well if that happened to you. But when I spent that time in South America, what I realized was how limited my beliefs are, and
Mm,
how limited I have, how much limitations I've put on myself because of the ideologies that I've grown up with. And I'm curious if you've experienced that as well.
yeah. But when you live in a different country, I think you get also like a bird view on your own country and on your own culture. So you suddenly see things from the outside, and you recognize dynamics that you might not have seen before because you were swimming like a fish in that water, and that was the norm, that was your standard. And then you see, living in a different country, that the same things can be done in different ways. Uh, you can have one question and different solutions to the question, and there is not one solution that is right or the only one that is correct. And so, yes, you do recognize things in your own culture. And I think it also gives you a little bit more freedom. When you live in your own country, in your own culture, in your own community, there are a lot more expectations and more pressure on you, how you're supposed to behave, how you should be living your life, what job you're supposed to do, what time you're supposed to be married, and are
Yeah.
you supposed to have kids, and how are you supposed to bring up your kids, and how are you supposed to live your life.
Yeah.
When you move outside of your community, then all this falls away, and that gives you freedom to march to your own drum, to the beat
Yeah.
of your own drum.
What was one freedom that you enjoyed? If you could name just one, what was one freedom you enjoyed when you experienced that change in uh, in that philosophy, I suppose?
Well, it's a hard question because it takes years. It's not things that you live in a different country and then suddenly you
Yeah.
you have some light bulb going up. Um, I think it was really living life on my own terms,
Mm.
according to my own values, and not according to hopes, expectations, or pressures of uh, my family, my country, and the norms that prevail there.
Yeah.
That was a huge freedom.
Yeah, Beatrix, I can really relate to that because it was funny. Um, that's my personal belief as well, and it was something that I learned from my trip to South America as well. Because in Ecuador, at least the Quechuan people, they had a great term for it, which is called La Chuya Vida, which basically means what you said, right? Live
Yes.
life with your terms. So I think. I think that's a really important thing to, as we grow older, to appreciate about ourselves. Like,
Mm,
all the stories and philosophies that we subscribe to, we also deserve to give ourselves the chance to unsubscribe to them
yeah.
and to live life as we experience it and to try new things, and I suppose over time discover who we can be.
Yes. Yes. Definitely. Um, I think also when you experience a few cultures, and again, I don't think you can do that in short holidays, and because in 3 weeks you will brush the surface. So you really have to dive into it. Um, and over time, you recognize that there are certain elements that are making up society and culture, and they can be different and practiced in very different ways. So you see, for example, power and responsibility, or identity. Are we more individualistic or collective? Um, what's the purpose of the individual? How do we communicate with each other? How do we define time and space and boundaries? So these are all the building blocks of different cultures, and with some experience, you get faster in recognizing them, and that helps you to behave in a way that facilitates relationships.
Yeah. What across all of these experiences, right? What did these experiences teach you about yourself and life in general? Since we're speaking briefly about this now.
Mm. Well, I think it's about two types of experiences that we all have in our life, and I would call them the adventure or the uncommon experiences. You have diversity experiences and adversity experiences. So by diversity, I mean when you move to a new country, or you change jobs and your function, or you start working for a new company. Okay, so these are diversity experiences. Adversity is all types of difficulties in relationships, or having different outcomes in projects or in life than what was planned for, going through illness or accident, losing faith in a system. So these are all adverse experiences, but they all put pressure on the person. So it's a bit of a crucible.
Yeah.
And that means that you can grow. I think we all need pressure and friction to to grow. And so these experiences can help. Now, what you can learn, you asked, it's for sure tolerance and flexibility, resilience, learning agility, emotional intelligence, knowing yourself and others better, and hopefully being a bridge builder of being flexible, of knowing how you function, how others function, and how can you cross that and build bridges.
Yeah. I really like the diversity and adversity analogy. Was this something you came up with along the way or something you learned through this process?
Well, I read a lot. It's because it's also the area of my work of inclusive leadership, and I'm fascinated by culture, not just in the sense of traveling to countries and learning about the architecture and the food and the people, but how culture shapes our belief systems and these filters through which we see the world. So that's quite a heavy influence in my coaching of bringing awareness to this, and then maybe opening these filters up to expand the view.
Yeah. Wow. So if I could delve into the work that you do, how do you help people open up their way of thinking? Do you have some advice around that?
So coaching is based on questions.
Yes.
So it's curiosity. It's building a level of trust, and it has to be a mix of this trust and acceptance, and then again pushing someone out of their comfort zone and invite them to see things and try things in a way that they haven't done before.
Yeah.
Because if you only ask questions and if it's always just understanding and accepting, then there is no growth, right?
Yeah.
Then it's just soul massage. So there has to be also this attention, and that's very I think intuitive. There are moments when a client will need a little bit more acceptance and support, and then there are moments when you know that okay, you can push and pull them a little bit more because they're able to stretch.
Yeah. And if we put coaching aside, maybe through your experiences alone, what advice would you give to to help at least help people think about what it means to open yourself up to new perspectives and to new experiences and adventures?
Well, if I have to reduce it into one thing, I think it would be the yes and way of thinking. So don't think in either or, but just yes and that there are many solutions, many perspectives, and they each are right in their own way and context. And so look at it in this bridge building perspective and look for the commonalities, the things that we share with other people.
Awesome, that's great advice. I want to uh, put you on the spot a little for the last question, which is I mean I for this series I wasn't intending to ask this question, but it's a very powerful question because I've got really great like thoughts from my guests from previous episodes, and that question is, what is one life lesson that has taken you the longest to learn?
Oh yeah. I think it's recognizing transgenerational patterns and changing them. And that comes back to this culture, not just the culture of the country where we come from, but the subcultures of your community, of your family. And this is how we do things. And are they serving you? And are they serving others in your choices and actions? And that requires really of again zooming out, observing it. And again, I want to call on the compassion. So when we recognize that something is not serving anymore, or maybe has not been serving for years, I don't want to reject those things because they had their place, right? So it's really about in a sort recognizing how they have helped, sometimes in very strange ways, and how it's time to go on and change to something new. Because only when we recognize these transgenerational patterns can we go to the root cause of things and belief systems.
Yeah, that's actually very powerful. And as you say that, I'm relating to it as well. And one of the transgeneral conflicts that I've had with both myself and just the idea itself was, especially within the family, was always like the topic of religion. But I think what you say is true, right? I mean, I used to say like it has no place, but I think what a healthier way of doing it, as you suggested, is to appreciate that it had its time and its place, and that if it doesn't serve you or me or whoever, then is to kind of find new ways to adapt to the life that you are living now.
Yeah, I see these difficult experiences or habits or feelings like like toddlers who want to get your attention, and the more you dismiss them, the more you ignore them and don't want them, the louder they scream. Well, when you say, okay, hey, what's up, and you accept them and welcome them. So not just accepting, but really welcoming them. And welcoming doesn't mean that you agree with it, or that you approve of it, or that you will continue doing whatever you're thinking of. But it just means that you accept it, welcome it, and that's how you integrate it into your whole life story and your personality.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, Beatrice, this has been an absolute pleasure. But before we go, maybe I'd like to give you some time to share with the listeners what you do, and if they are interested to reach out to you, how they can do so.
Sure, thank you very much. So I do leadership coaching, and my focus area is inclusive leadership, because the workforce is becoming more and more diverse. And the people that companies need to interact with, including their customers and suppliers. And through technology, we're really interconnected. So I think it is crucial to be able to effectively collaborate with people who are different from us, be it in their gender, race, generation, or their ways of thinking. So that's how I help my clients, mostly organizations who sponsor their employees. And you can find me on my website, which is beatrixedercoaching.com, or via LinkedIn.
Sounds good. And I'll put the descriptions as well in our podcast, so it'll be easier to find.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed this. I actually learned quite a bit about myself as well. So it's been doubly helpful, I must say.
I hope we will have other occasions to chat.
Anytime. I welcome it.
Thank you, Nick.